Welcome to Power Designer for IQ. This presentation and demonstration will introduce you to Power Designer and how Power Designer relates to IQ version. Power Designer has some unique capabilities that make it useful for POC engagements. Power Designer assists in the sales cycle by visually demonstrating value through tangible models and metadata. Power Designer support for IQ facilitates migrations, transformations, staging, and BI architecture. Power Designer participates in all areas of BI development, including sourcing, ETL, and warehouse construction. This allows you to participate at a level beyond just warehouse implementation. Power Designer's graphical interface makes it easier to implement and manage IQ. Power Designer's graphical user interface makes it easy to implement, manage, and document IQ installations. In addition, Power Designer supports many non-Sybase databases as well as IQ. Here are 4 typical tasks that Power Designer helps simplify for you during the POC process. We'll look at each one of these in more detail. Before beginning any POC with Power Designer, there's a few things you have to set up first. First, with your databases, make sure all of the databases that you're going to be working with are installed and functioning. That is, they have an ODBC connection, you understand what the server name is, you know the logins, and you know the passwords. In addition, when working with Replication Server, also make sure Replication Server is installed and functioning, and that you have an ODBC profile for the RSSD. Specific support for IQ is defined through extended model definitions. This is the way in which Power Designer extends itself to create additional functionality to support IQ. We'll be looking at some of these extended model definitions when we go through the demo. They're important because they're what makes the whole operation work. One of the more time-consuming tasks with any IQ implementation is the creation of column indexes. Power Designer can assist in this by creating automatic indexes based on your statistics that you reverse engineer from the database. And during the demonstration, I'll show you how this works. One of the first tasks we're going to take a look at in the demonstration is migrating an OLTP database to an IQ data warehouse. So we'll take a look at how you can reverse engineer the source. You can generate an IQ schema from that source, create some IQ specific indexes for that data warehouse, then actually show you how you can map the source and the target together to generate scripts for loading the IQ data warehouse. There are 3 different methods to move data from an OLTP database to IQ. The first 2 involve scripts. The third is an ETL process. ETL is out of the scope of this demonstration, so what we're going to do is concentrate on the first 2 methods, generating an export script and generating an insert location script. Here's an overview of how the export script and load script works with IQ. The export script exports the data files out of your OLTP source, and the load script actually loads those data files into IQ. Creating a staging database for use with IQ can be one of the more complicated things in a POC, but I'll show you how you can get it done with a couple of mouse clicks in Power Designer. So we're at the customer site, and the first thing the customer wants is to take an existing OLTP system or any other data system and load it into IQ. So let me show you how you can do that with Power Designer. The first step is to reverse engineer the source OLTP system. Here we'll give the model a meaningful name like source OLTP system. Next we'll pick the database target. And for this demonstration we're going to use a SQL Anywhere version 9. Here we have the database reverse engineering window, and one important thing we want to take a look at is if we're going to let Power Designer create some IQ indexes for us, we're going to need to reverse engineer the database with statistics. Now we have our source OLTP system reverse engineered. The next thing we want to do is actually create an IQ database that duplicates the same schema that we have in the OLTP source system. To do that, we do a generation in Power Designer. Here we have our generation options, and this is where you choose the target database. I've chosen Sybase IQ 12.7, and I'm also going to give this a meaningful name. Another important step in this process is in the Detail tab. The Detail tab has an option for Generate Mappings. It's imperative that we actually do this because The load scripts that we create are dependent on the mappings. And if you look, you'll see there's a new data model that's been created called IQ Warehouse. So we have our source OLTP system and our IQ Warehouse. The next step is to add the extended model definition that's going to allow us to generate the scripts. We get that from the model menu. The extended model definitions window allows me to create new extended model definitions or pick one that's already been created. We're going to pick one that's already been created. Here you can see that there's a data movement IQ extended model definition. Now we just need to set the parameters for generating the scripts. Here in the model properties of the IQ Warehouse, you can see there's a tab here called Data Movement. This tab lets me set what the field delimiter is, the row delimiter, the maximum image size, and what the directory is I want to load the information into. Under Data Sources, there's also an IQ Warehouse data source property. There's also a Data Movement tab here. This Data Movement tab, you set up the remote server name, the database source name, the dump file directory, etc. It's imperative that you do this, otherwise the generation won't work. In addition, you also have to make sure you set up the database connections. That includes adding the ODBC driver, the login, and the password. There's one more step, and that's to create the indexes in IQ. If we look at the existing indexes in IQ, you see from this list of indexes that we have about 4 or 5 indexes that came over from our OLTP source system. If I want to keep those, I can leave them there. If I want to delete them, I simply can click on the X button, and that will remove an index or multiple indexes. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to add some indexes for IQ for every column in the database. And to do that, I'm going to have Power Designer do that calculation for me. In Power Designer, there's a Rebuild Indexes function. Here we can create indexes for IQ based on the statistics that we got from the OLTP source information. Now when I go back to my list of indexes, you'll see that Power Designer has created indexes for me for every column in IQ. Let's take a look at the example of the load script and the dump script. Here you can see under the data source properties that there's a preview tab, and the preview tab will show you an example of what the dump script looks like. And you can see that by the tab down at the bottom which says Data Movement IQ Dump Script. There's also a tab for the load script. To actually generate the scripts, use the Tools menu and then pick the option for Extended Generation. Extended Generation lets me see the selection and the options as well as what files will be generated. And it says here that we'll generate a dump script and a load script. I'm going to turn off the check model just to show you how this works. And then when it's complete, Power Designer will show you the .SQL files that represent the load script and the dump script. The next step in our POC is to actually use Replication Server to load IQ by way of a staging database built in ASE. So we have the source and we have the targets already defined, that is the OLTP system and the IQ warehouse. We're going to take this information and we're going to leverage it in what's called an information liquidity model to build the staging database for IQ. So in the new model window, I want to make sure that I choose information liquidity model, and I also want to choose a tab for extended model definitions because there's an extended model definition I need to have in this model, and it's called IQ staging. We're going to let Power Designer's Replication Server wizard guide us through most of this process. The first step in the wizard introduces the wizard and tells us what we're going to do. This step asks us to name the source information or source database. This step asks us to pick which schema represents the source database. This step is asking us to create publications for either each table in the database or one publication for all tables. This step asks us to select exactly which information we want replicated. We don't have to replicate everything. In this case, I am going to replicate everything. This step asks us to give a name to the target system. And of course, this step asks me to pick the target, which is IQ. When we're done, you'll see that we have a target database and a source database going through Replication Server. What we need is the staging database. So right now, if you look on the left-hand side in the workspace, you'll see that we have a source OLTP system where the information is coming from. The IQ warehouse, that's the target, that's where the information is going to, and the information liquidity model, which represents the data movement. If I right-click on the target, I have a choice of creating a staging database for either Sybase ASC or SQL Anywhere. I've chosen to add an ASC staging database, and here it's asking information about the name of the server and other details. So it's important to make sure that you have your ASC staging database already installed, running, and you know what its name is so that you can fill in this information. When we're done, you'll see that we have a source, a replication server, an ASC staging database, and a target all built in Power Designer. If you look on the left side of the screen, you'll see that a staging database for IQ has been built. So this is the entire schema for that staging database. You'll see in this database a delete, insert, and update procedure for each table. You'll also see a clean staging tables procedure. In the IQ Data Warehouse, there's also been a procedure added called load staging. To build the ASC staging database, just use the database menu to generate the DDL to build the ASC staging database. Power Designer 15.1 is on the drawing board and should be released sometime this year. In 15.1, we're going to have some specialized support for version 15 and 15.1 versions of IQ, including new data types, physical options, and some other things. We're going to have some specialized support for information lifecycle management, graphical user interface to handle that, as well as code generation to manage the implementation of that. And specifically for the information lifecycle management, if you hit a customer that says today it's rather complex and difficult to implement, later when 15.1 of Power Designer comes out, you'll be able to re-engage that customer and show them how the graphical user interface actually makes it kind of easy. And also, if you take the time to learn IQ now, it'll help you with your IQ endeavors because we're adding more and more functionality to Power Designer to support IQ for the future. So, in summary, using Power Designer and a model-driven approach can greatly accelerate the development, increase the productivity, and reduce errors for IQ Data Warehouse design and implementation. And that concludes this presentation on using Power Designer with IQ.